Many Protestants are enamored by scholars and scholarship, and sometimes question or even accuse that there is no scholarship to support the position Jerome changed his mind. This is completely false and obvious to anyone who has watched David Zaraz's material closely. But to make it easier on everyone, I've summarized the scholarship that David appeals to, and we'll go through each one by one. Check confirms that Jerome did indeed initially view the Deuteros as inspired scripture, as one can see in his commentaries on Ephesians, Galatians, Philemon, and Titus. I've even heard that Scheck believes that Jerome always believed the Deuteros were inspired and never deviated from that. Don't know if it's true, haven't verified it myself. While I can understand why Scheck would argue that, it seems to go too far and is hard for me to believe based on all the evidence. Leander, by way of Cozen, believes Jerome would have submitted to Pope Innocent on the Deuteros on Innocent's canon list had Jerome known about Innocent's decree on the canon. Behan believes Jerome changed his view around 390 AD, with an unhesitating acceptance of the Deuteros before 390 AD. Pointing to Jerome's commentaries on Ecclesiastes, Ephesians, Galatians, Philemon, and Titus, just like Scheck did. Behan also says that Jerome had favorite Bible verses, and some of them were even drawn from the books of the Bible, which he later questioned or rejected, at least in theory. Skehan then notes that these earlier citations of Jerome to the Deuteros are a testimony to the practice of the Latin churches that favored a wider canon than he would later admit. Though the impress of his earlier training never wore off completely. Sutcliffe says Jerome acknowledges the canonicity of the Deuteros in an earlier period, citing how Jerome refers to 1 Maccabees being, quote, in the treasury of the scriptures, but that a change happens around 390 AD. Sutcliffe apparently points out how Jerome called Ecclesiasticus, or Sirach, Holy Scripture in his commentary on Isaiah, and called wisdom scripture in his commentary on Jeremiah. I also thought it was interesting how Sam Shamoun points out how Jews in the first century were naming their children after the patriarch of the Maccabean dynasty, namely Mattathias. And as we see in Acts chapter 1, it is Matthias, a variation of Mattathias, who is chosen as the replacement for Judas. J. N. D. Kelly admits that the early church used the larger Catholic canon and that Jerome was influenced by the Jews, not the church, to convert to a shorter canon than the church accepted. Kelly says Jerome's conversion to Hebrew verity carried with it an important corollary, his acceptance also of the Hebrew canon. End quote. Kelly also says that the early church accepted the larger Greek-speaking Jewish canon without question, basically affirming that the diaspora Jews had a larger canon than most Protestants have today.